My whole life went downhill the day my dad brought his illegitimate son, Ethan, home to live with us. I started tripping on flat ground and choking on my food. During my SATs, I got a splitting headache so bad I thought my eyes would pop out. I was on track for an Ivy League school, but I completely bombed the exams. My parents, who had always doted on me, started to hate me for no reason, and eventually kicked me out of the house. The last piece of bread I begged for ended up choking me to death. When I was reborn, I came back with a special ability to reflect curses, and I woke up on the very first day my bad luck began. This time, I was hoping Ethan's black magic would be even more vicious. The moment I opened my eyes, I was teetering on the edge of the stairs, half a foot hanging in the air. Ethan was standing at the bottom, his eyes fixed on me, seemingly waiting for me to fall. To the right of the stairs was a warrior statue he'd given my dad yesterday when he arrived. It was holding a steel sword high in the air, positioned just right. It was too late to pull my foot back. I pitched forward headfirst, my face aimed directly at the statue's sword. A smirk spread across Ethan's face, the look of a plan coming together perfectly. But his victory lasted only a second. My body twisted unnaturally in midair, changing direction. He didn't have time to move. I landed right on top of him, crushing him to the floor. The statue next to us toppled over with a deafening crash. I was perfectly fine. I just dusted myself off and stood up. Suddenly, Ethan let out a blood-curdling scream. The statue's steel sword had plunged straight into his face. The gash was gruesome, blood pouring out from the torn flesh. His life wasn't in danger, but he was definitely going to be scarred for life. I clicked my tongue. In my last life, I was the one with the broken bones and disfigured face, lying in a pool of my own blood. But now my rebound ability had kicked in. The first major disaster that was meant for me had landed squarely on Ethan. I watched him writhe on the floor, thinking to myself, "Ethan, you can do better than that. Hit me with something stronger." In my previous life, that accident left a scar several inches long on my face. It never fully healed, not even by the day I died. In the end, with pus and blood running down my face, I huddled by a stinking sewer drain and choked to death on a piece of bread I'd begged for. No one even collected my body. It was a passing Taoist master who found me. He sighed a few times and helped bury me. He bit his middle finger and drew a talisman on a piece of yellow paper with his blood, then placed it on my body. "Go in peace, child," he said. "With this, no curse can ever harm you again." Only then did I finally understand that my bizarre string of misfortunes was all because of the evil curses placed on me by my illegitimate half-brother. The talisman the master gave me didn't just give me a chance to be reborn, it gave me the ability to reflect curses. The more dangerous the curse thrown at me, the harsher the payback for the caster. This time around, Ethan wasn't going to get his way so easily. My dad was heartbroken that Ethan got hurt right after arriving at our home. When they got back from the hospital, Dad went straight to the supermarket, bought the best ingredients, and dove into the kitchen. He was busy for hours, making a fancy soup, steaming a whole fish. He covered the table with a massive feast. My mom stroked Ethan's hair tenderly, telling him to eat up so he could get his strength back. Dad, meanwhile, was carefully picking out the best pieces of chicken and fish for Ethan's plate, making sure he wouldn't bite into any bones. I couldn't believe my mom was fawning over this illegitimate kid too. I was their actual son. I came downstairs to see this happy little family scene. When I looked at the table, there wasn't even a plate set for me. Confused, I called out, "Mom? Dad, where's my plate? Why didn't anyone call me for dinner?" To my surprise, my parents looked up at me, then at each other, both with blank expressions. It was like they'd completely forgotten they even had me. That's when Ethan spoke up. "Bro, Mom and Dad worked so hard cooking. You should be more considerate instead of blaming them right away." As he spoke, he put some of the chicken and fish into my parents' bowls, dutifully telling them to eat more. They were practically moved to tears. It seemed like only then did they remember that their biological son hadn't eaten. My dad looked at me sternly, his tone harsh. "You should learn from Ethan. This is how a son is supposed to act. Not like you, lazy and useless, just waiting for handouts with no appreciation for your parents." My mom shot me a look of disgust I'd never seen before. "Just go eat in the kitchen." Ethan got hurt so badly today trying to protect you. You should be ashamed of yourself." I was stunned speechless. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. So that was his story. He claimed his face got messed up protecting me. No wonder Mom was so on his side. Ethan shot me a triumphant, challenging look. The gash on his face just made him look uglier. I remembered my past life. My parents had doted on Ethan as if they were under a spell, eventually not only raising him as their own but also kicking me, their real son, out onto the street to die. This time, I wasn't going to let that happen again. After a moment, I decided not to argue. I just turned and went back to my room. I had just laid down when Ethan knocked on my door. Before I could say anything, he pushed past me, walked in and sat on my bed. I frowned. "Ethan, I don't like people sitting on my bed. Say what you need to say. I'm trying to sleep." He completely ignored me, looking around my room, touching my model motorcycle and expensive Lego sets. "Bro, I like your room. The window is so big. It's airy, perfect for me while I'm recovering." I almost laughed. "You're dreaming. You're a guest in this house. What gives you the right to make demands like that?" A malicious glint appeared in his eyes. "The fact that you got me hurt. The fact that Mom and Dad adore me. What about it?" "No, absolutely not," I said coldly. His eyes darted around, and then he suddenly shoved me out of the room and locked the door from the inside. I was furious and started pounding on the door. My parents heard the commotion and came upstairs to see what was happening. Normally, they couldn't stand to see me wronged in the slightest. But today, with Ethan stealing my room, they were completely nonchalant. In fact, they started blaming me. "Ethan is injured. He really does need a bigger room to recover. You're the older brother. Can't you just let him have it? There's a small bed in the storage room next to the guest bathroom. You can move in there for now. Stop throwing a tantrum and being so immature. You're old enough to know some basic manners, aren't you?" My first instinct was to break down the door and take my room back. But then I remembered something. The storage room was right next to my bedroom, separated by only one wall, and there was a small, hidden balcony connecting the two. I was curious to see what exactly Ethan was up to in my room. What kind of dark magic was he using to turn my family upside down? I calmed down, nodded at my parents, and moved a spare mattress into the storage room. Sure enough, in the middle of the night, something strange happened. I was woken up by a faint, rustling whisper. Quietly, I climbed across the small balcony and peeked through a crack in my bedroom curtains. The room was dark. Ethan was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his body twisted into a bizarre, grotesque position. He was muttering a string of incomprehensible words, his voice hoarse and sharp, the tone venomous. It was obviously some kind of weird spell. Then he bit his fingertip hard and began drawing on a piece of parchment with his own blood. Suddenly, he looked like he was possessed. His eyes rolled back into his head, and a horrifying gurgling sound came from his throat. A cold sweat broke out over my body. I hid on the balcony, clamping my hand over my mouth, terrified of making a sound. After a moment, he calmed down. In the moonlight, his scarred face was a mask of pure evil and malice. I heard his curse as clear as day. With my mother's heart's blood as an offering, I curse Leo to a life of endless misfortune and ruin. I want him to be friendless and alone, to die in solitude. I want him to be plagued by bad luck, to fail at everything he tries. I want him to live a life of poverty, sickness, and useless toil. It felt like a venomous snake was slithering up my spine. My skin went cold, and my scalp tingled. So that's how he did it. In my past life, he destroyed me with this poison curse. Just as he'd wished, my entire life was turned upside down, and I ended up dying on the street. He was jealous of my easy life and wanted me dead so he could take my place. I bit my tongue, trying to stop my teeth from chattering. Let's see what you can do now, I thought, now that I can bounce it all back at you. My parents paid a fortune to transfer Ethan to my private school. As luck would have it, we ended up in the same class. I'm pretty outgoing and have a lot of friends at school. He, on the other hand, was new, hadn't seen much of the world, and was timid and barely noticeable. Most of the kids in class didn't even know he was my brother. But if he wasn't causing trouble, he wouldn't be Ethan. One day after the main break, everyone was trickling back into the classroom. Suddenly, we heard Ethan frantically rummaging through his desk, like he'd lost something precious. "Has anyone seen my jade pendant?" he cried out. Students quickly gathered around him. "It was the only thing my grandma left me. She said it was a family heirloom, super valuable. Someone once offered over $1 million for it, but she wouldn't sell. She gave it to me before she died and told me to take good care of it. I always keep it in a little box deep inside my desk. Nobody's ever even seen it. It was there before break and now it's gone." His eyes started to water, and his chest heaved. He looked utterly distraught. Most guys don't cry that easily, so everyone immediately felt sorry for him. I had to admit, setting aside his character, Ethan's acting skills were way better than most of the celebrities out there. The class president, Grant, realizing the thief must be one of us, looked grim. "Ethan, think again. Did anyone know you had that pendant?" He deliberately glanced at me before quickly looking down again. "Leo did. He's my brother. He was there when my grandma gave it to me. He said it was beautiful and even threatened me to give it to him. When I refused, he pushed me down and started kicking me. I stared daggers at him. He suddenly grabbed my arm, pleading, 'Leo, please, I'm begging you, just give it back. It's the only thing I have left from my grandma. I know you've always wanted it. During break, I even saw you come back into the classroom all by yourself. Grant was my best friend.' Hearing this, he looked at me confused. The other students started whispering, 'Ethan, don't just accuse people. Leo isn't like that.' But others weren't so sure. 'But why would Ethan lie? And he said Leo is his brother.' As the argument heated up, I slowly said one word: 'Security.' Hearing that, a faint, almost unnoticeable smile touched Ethan's lips. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, 'Bad luck, bro. I heard yesterday that the security camera in our classroom just happened to break. Is that so?' I turned to him and smiled slightly. 'Well, your information must be out of date. My luck is pretty good. The camera fixed itself this morning.' Ethan's face went pale. A few minutes later, Grant came back with the teacher and the security footage. The entire class saw it crystal clear. During the break, Ethan came back to the empty classroom, took the jade pendant out of its box himself, and crept over to my desk, shoving it deep into a crevice. Grant shot up from his seat, furious. 'Ethan, what the hell? Why would you frame Leo?' The tables had turned so fast he didn't even have time to think of an excuse. He blurted out, 'But the camera was broken yesterday. I thought it was still broken, so I—' He clapped a hand over his mouth, but it was too late. The whole class was staring at him like he was a freak. I said coldly, 'And you call yourself my brother? Playing games, setting people up. Now everyone sees you for who you really are.' Now that he was exposed, he dropped the act and glared at me with pure hatred. I thought of his curse from the night before. Friendless and alone, to die in solitude. In my past life, that prophecy started coming true for me on this very day. The camera had been broken, and they found the missing pendant in my desk. The whole class thought I was a thief. Even Grant, my best friend, refused to believe me. I was completely ostracized. A few of the school bullies started targeting me, and not a single person would help me. Everyone rallied around Ethan, the victim, comforting and supporting him. I didn't have a single friend left by the time I eventually dropped out and ended up on the streets. But this time, thanks to my rebound ability, his little scheme failed. The broken camera had mysteriously started working again, laying the truth bare for everyone to see. Everyone saw the real person behind the mask, and they all looked at him with contempt. No one wanted to talk to him anymore. After school, I was walking with Grant. A few of the school bullies blocked Ethan's path at the gate. "Heard you're the guy who framed his own brother. Let's have a chat." He looked up in terror, his eyes pleading with Grant and me for help. We glanced at him once, then turned and walked away without looking back. The bullies dragged him into a nearby alley. A moment later, we could hear the sounds of a beating and his terrified screams. Other students saw it happen, but they all just turned their heads and walked away, pretending not to notice. I wonder if Ethan can handle this little rebound. When I got home, Ethan dropped the act and cornered me in the living room, fuming. "Leo, you did that on purpose, didn't you?" I feigned surprise. "Did what on purpose?" "Exposed you for framing me?" He was speechless for a moment, just glaring at me with venom in his eyes. After a long pause, he spat out, "You just wait. The show's not over yet." I leaned in close, my eyes fixed on the ugly caterpillar-like scar on his face, and sneered, "Ethan, when you do too much evil, be careful it doesn't come back to bite you." He stared at me in shock, and then slowly, his expression changed. A strange, dark shadow fell over his face. He started rapidly chanting a long string of weird, incomprehensible sounds. His voice grew sharp and piercing, dripping with malice. He moved closer, his eyes rolling back, the whites turning bloodshot. I was startled and took a few steps back. He was casting a spell. The last few words I understood. Academic failure, all effort in vain. Rage boiled up inside me. We were seniors, about to face our final exams. I knew that you reap what you sow. And for years I had worked my ass off, studying diligently. It paid off with top grades. I was always at the head of my class. Barring any surprises, I was supposed to be starting at an Ivy League school that September. But in my last life, Ethan had hit me with this same toxic curse. As the exams approached, I developed chronic headaches. The pain was excruciating, and after visiting every hospital, no doctor could find a cause. Unsurprisingly, my grades plummeted. I went from being one of the top students in the school to the bottom of the barrel. On the day of the exams, the pain was so bad I couldn't even think straight. I couldn't finish the test and ended up failing miserably. I had always thought it was just my fate, but it was him all along, cursing me out of pure jealousy and hatred. Good thing the me of today wasn't the pushover I was in my last life. Ethan sneered, "Leo, you think you're so smart? Ivy League material? We'll see about that. Just you wait." I smiled faintly. "Ethan, you want to make a bet?" He looked at me warily. "Bet on what?" I looked him straight in the eye and said slowly, "My grades are real. I earned them through hard work. I don't care what kind of black magic you use, I don't believe you can control my scores. On the next monthly exam, I'm still going to be number 1 in our class." He snorted in contempt. "If I don't get first place, I'll leave this house voluntarily and let you be the only son of this family. But if you get last place, you have to get the hell out of my house. So Ethan, do you have the guts to take that bet?" He froze for a second. The position of the family's sole heir was too tempting to resist. That was the whole reason he was doing all this dark magic in the first place. Now that I was offering to leave on my own, there was no way he would refuse. Besides, with his curse already on me, he was brimming with confidence, certain of his victory. He gave a sinister laugh. "Leo, don't you regret this?" With my rebound ability, I was sure that this time, he'd be the one with the debilitating headaches, not me. Still, just to be safe, I buckled down and studied seriously, not slacking off for a second. I did practice tests nonstop, pulling all-nighters. Even my teachers were confident I'd get the top score in the whole school. Ethan's grades were mediocre to begin with, but lately, he couldn't seem to study at all. Whenever he sat down with a book, his vision would blur, and sometimes he'd get a splitting headache. He couldn't focus at all. It got so bad that whenever he tried to pick up a pen, his hand would tremble so much he couldn't write a single word. Even when the headaches weren't bothering him, he was either engrossed in his dark arts or out spending our parents' money, partying every night. As the monthly exam got closer, he started to panic. One day, I had just gotten home when my parents called me into the study. My dad asked grimly, "Leo, have you been trying to sabotage Ethan's studies lately?" I looked at him, completely baffled. "What do you mean, sabotage his studies?" My mom looked upset too. "Ethan just transferred from the countryside. His academic foundation isn't as good as yours. The least you could do is help him. But instead, you're secretly trying to hurt him? What's your problem?" I was even more confused. Hurt him how? My parents exchanged another look, their faces growing darker. "Wasn't it you who secretly tore up Ethan's review materials? And he said he felt so sick yesterday he almost fainted, because you threatened to kick him out if he didn't do well on the exam." I almost laughed out loud. Am I so bored that I'd go around tearing up his notes? Has he even looked at his notes once? You guys actually believe that crap? Mom, Dad, look at me. I'm your son, not Ethan. He's a monster with a hidden agenda. My dad shot to his feet, his tone harsher than I'd ever heard. "Leo, you've disappointed us deeply. You will apologize to Ethan right now. And to teach you a lesson, you are not allowed to take the monthly exam. I was completely dumbfounded. It seemed like my curse rebounding ability had no effect on my parents at all. A knot of worry started to form in my stomach. I still took the monthly exam. Thanks to my hard work, I easily scored first place in the entire school. And Ethan, who couldn't be bothered to study, unsurprisingly landed in dead last. I found him and demanded he honor our bet, pack his bags, and go back to his hometown. But he dropped to his knees, begging my parents to let him stay. There was no way I was going to agree, but I couldn't overcome my parents' favoritism for Ethan. Just as we were at a standstill, things took a new turn. Ethan's mother, Ivonne, showed up. Years ago, my dad had an affair. Ivonne got pregnant and had the baby Ethan. Now Ivonne wanted a piece of our family's money, so she sent Ethan to live with us. Ivonne was broke, and Ethan had a hard life, which is why he was so desperate to get into our family, even willing to use black magic to get rid of me and take my place. In my previous life, after Ethan left, Ivonne felt like she'd gotten rid of a huge burden, and never once tried to get him back. But this time, she actually came looking for him. Sitting in our living room, the look Ivonne gave Ethan was filled with a deep, repressed disgust. I understood then. The growing revulsion from his own mother was another rebound from the curse. As I suspected, Ivonne hadn't come to take her son home. From the conversation between her and my mom, I learned that Ivonne was demanding a huge sum of money. If we didn't pay up, she would expose my dad's affair and ruin our family's reputation. When Ethan heard this, his face turned white. He had come to our family to live a good life. If we went bankrupt, he'd be back to being poor. He jumped up and shouted, "Ivonne, don't you dare. I'm a son of this family now, not yours." Without a word, Ivonne slapped him hard across the face. His cheek instantly swelled up, and blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "I raised you for 17 years. You ate my food, you lived under my roof, and now that you've made it, you're just going to forget about your own mother? It's been ages since I sent you here. Have you contacted me even once?" Ethan threw himself at my mom's feet, grabbing her legs and pleading, "Mom, don't listen to her. You're the only mom I recognize. You're my only mom." My mom hesitated, unsure what to say. Ivonne shot my mom a glare. "He's my son. It's not up to anyone else. If you don't give me the money, then get ready to be dragged through the mud by everyone." My parents felt helpless. They decided to let Ivonne take Ethan and give her a sum of money to settle things once and for all. From the window, I watched as Ivonne dragged Ethan away, pulling his hair and kicking him the whole way. He looked back at our house. His eyes were filled with a venomous hatred, not just for me, but for my entire family. I thought that with Ethan gone, my life would finally go back to normal. But it was far from over. A week or two later, Ethan showed up at our house again. He knelt before my mom, begging her to adopt him. My mom was a mess of tears and snot, hugging him and crying. "Ethan, it's not that I don't want to take you in. But Ivonne is your birth mother. She gave you life. It's not my decision to make." Ethan shook his head frantically, swearing, "Mom, don't worry. I promise, Ivonne will never show up again." When he said that, an unmistakable darkness flickered in his eyes. Thinking about his cruel methods, my stomach tightened. What had he done to make sure Ivonne would never bother us again? My parents let him come back and stay with us temporarily. But I felt something was very wrong, so I hired someone to go to his hometown and ask around. Sure enough, something was off. Not long after Ivonne returned home, she had mysteriously disappeared. Ethan told everyone she had gone off to find work, but no one knew where she went. Could it be that Ivonne had fallen victim to Ethan? I secretly hired a private investigator to go back to his town and look into it. Shortly after Ethan returned to our house, my dad's business ran into trouble. Overnight, the company he had been running so well suddenly had a cash flow problem. Within a few days, it all came crashing down. Suppliers demanded payment, the bank called in loans, and business partners pulled their investments. It was a tidal wave we couldn't handle. My dad sold the house, the cars, and used up all our savings, but it wasn't enough to save the company. In the end, we had to watch as the court auctioned off our home. Our family was kicked out, crammed into a tiny apartment. My parents were in a terrible state. One day, I had stayed late after school for tutoring and got home late. When I walked in, my parents were sitting in the living room while Ethan massaged my mom's shoulders. My dad's face was terrifyingly dark. With everything falling apart, you still have the nerve to go out and play until the middle of the night. I tried to explain that I was with my tutor, but they wouldn't listen. Ethan had a smirk on his face as he said in a snide tone, "A master I know back home said that our family is suffering this misfortune because there's a jinx in the house, dragging everyone down. Not only will he cost us our fortune, but he'll cost us our lives." It was complete nonsense, something no one would normally believe. But for some reason, it was like my parents' minds were clouded. They actually thought Ethan was telling the truth. They screamed at me, and then banished me to a narrow cot they'd set up for me on the small balcony. The only small bedroom, of course, was now Ethan's room. In the middle of the night, I tossed and turned, unable to make sense of anything. Suddenly, I saw Ethan tiptoeing out of his room. He went to the bathroom, picked up my toothbrush, and fiddled with it for a long time. It clicked. He was collecting my saliva. My mind cleared. He was preparing another curse. This was my chance to make my parents see his true face. I quickly snuck into my parents' room, woke them up gently, and led them to my balcony to secretly watch what Ethan was doing. I was sure that once my parents saw the truth with their own eyes, they would finally wake up and realize they were harboring a monster. Sure enough, Ethan soon began his ritual. He twisted his body into an impossibly contorted shape, muttering strange sounds. He cut off the bristles from my toothbrush with scissors, mixed the fine hairs with a talisman, and burned it all to ash. Finally, he took out 2 small vials from inside his shirt, poured out the dark brown liquid inside, and sprinkled it over the ashes, chanting all the while. We could all understand what he was saying. He was casting a curse. A curse on our family, for our wealth to be scattered and our family to be destroyed. A curse on me, for a life of bad luck and an early death. And a curse on his own mother, Ivonne, for her to die a horrible death, her soul shattered. A chill ran down my spine. The depth of his evil was far beyond what I had ever imagined. My parents stood in the darkness, watching silently, their faces grim and terrifying. It seemed that this version of Ethan was a complete shock to them, filling them with anger. I whispered, "Dad, Mom, do you see now? Ethan, he's a monster." My dad turned to look at me, his expression incredibly complex. After a long moment, I heard his voice, as cold as stone. "Leo, you can get out of our house." I was kicked out of my home by my own parents. It was exactly the same as my last life. I don't know why, but the rebound effect of the curses had no impact on my parents. Ethan would get hurt, lose friends, fail in school, and even be blackmailed by his own mother because of the rebounds. But he never lost his grip on my parents' love. Even when I put the proof right in front of their eyes, it didn't change their favoritism for him, or their hatred for me. My heart felt like ash. Just like before, I wandered the streets aimlessly. Was I destined to meet the same violent end, with no difference at all? I wandered under a bridge and suddenly shivered. The familiar trash can, the familiar stench. This was the exact spot where I had choked on a piece of scavenged bread and died. I had ended up here again. As I stood there, lost and confused, a figure appeared in front of me. I looked up. A wise, elderly Taoist master was looking at me with sympathy. His face was vaguely familiar. "Ah!" I cried out, recognizing him instantly. "Master, it's you?" It was this same master who had buried my body in my past life, and given me the talisman that allowed me to be reborn with the power to reflect curses. And now here I was again, standing before him like a stray dog. He listened to my story and sighed softly. His expression grew heavy, especially when he heard about my parents' cruel and irrational behavior. After a long silence, he suddenly asked me if I had any other close relatives besides my parents. I shook my head. The old master shook his head slightly, stroking his beard. "Have you ever wondered," he said with a sigh, "why you were given a second chance after such an unjust death?" I looked at him blankly, not understanding what he meant. He took out the talisman from his robes and handed it to me, telling me to look closely. The talisman was covered in a web of lines, all drawn in blood. A rebirth talisman is a form of dark magic itself. Combined with the power of reflection, it is the darkest of the dark. For a mortal to obtain such power, there is only one way. It requires the heart's blood of one's closest kin, combined with a piece of their soul, infused into the talisman. Without a loved one's willing sacrifice, the one who died unjustly cannot even enter the cycle of reincarnation. They are doomed to wander the most miserable places of the earth for all eternity. Child, your parents gave 2 bowls of their heart's blood and a piece of each of their souls to give you this new life and the power of reflection. And you still blame them for being irrational? You still call them cruel? His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. A current surged through my entire body. So that was it. My parents had been deluded by Ethan because, in order to save me, they had lost 2 bowls of their own heart's blood and a piece of their souls. They had traded their vitality for my life, and I had been blaming them for being unfair. I burst into tears and fell to my knees before the master, begging him to save my parents. My parents had been so good to me. I couldn't let them stay under that spell. Master, please tell me how I can save my parents. The master nodded and thought for a moment before speaking slowly. It is not so difficult. The evil curses must all be reflected back onto the caster. He has committed so much evil, he will eventually reap what he has sown. When that time comes, and the source of his dark magic is destroyed, the pieces of your parents' souls will naturally return. I stood up and bowed deeply to the master. Master, Ethan's evil has reached its peak. The ultimate rebound is already on its way. Ethan was about to taste the bitter fruit of his own making. The private investigator I hired had found Ivonne. Ethan had drugged her, mixing sleeping pills into her soup. While she was unconscious, he dragged her into the cellar. To make his curses as powerful and vicious as possible, he also needed the heart's blood of his closest kin. But he was too brutal. He had viciously carved out 2 large pieces of flesh from Yvonne's chest. Blood had gushed out, and he couldn't stop the bleeding. It was far more than 2 bowls. She nearly bled to death. Thankfully, my investigator sensed something was wrong and never gave up the search for Ivonne. He finally found her in the cellar of her house. When they rescued her, Ivonne had lost almost all her blood and was clinging to life by a thread. But she survived. If my PI hadn't found her in time, she probably would have died. I couldn't believe Ethan would do something so monstrous to his own mother. He truly would stop at nothing to live the life of a rich young master in my family. When I heard the news, I immediately arranged for Ivonne to be sent to the best hospital for treatment. Ethan had carved up his own parent to fuel his most vicious curse. And that curse was about to be reflected back onto him, tenfold. What goes around comes around. There was no escape for him. After Ivonne recovered, she tracked down Ethan. This time, she was 10 times more ruthless than before. She hired a group of thugs, burly men with menacing tattoos covering their necks and arms. They tied Ethan up and threw him into a car. His blood-curdling screams could be heard 3 blocks away. He was taken back to the countryside, locked in the cellar, and hung from a beam while the men whipped him with leather straps until there wasn't an inch of unharmed skin on his body. When he passed out, Ivonne would throw salt water on him to wake him up, and the torture would continue. The villagers used to have some sympathy for him, and would occasionally intervene when Ivonne was abusive. But this time, everyone knew he had carved up his own mother to perform some kind of blood magic, collecting bowls of her blood with the intention of leaving her for dead. Ivonne may have been poor, but she had raised him to adulthood. Now no one had any sympathy for a child with the heart of a snake. When they heard his screams from the cellar, the villagers pretended not to hear. If they happened to walk by, they would hurry past without a glance. Ethan was tortured for days and nights until he was barely breathing, just clinging to life. Fearing he would die, Ivonne finally had him cut down. But he went completely insane, scrambling into an abandoned woodshed in the backyard. Ivonne followed him in and saw a bizarre altar set up in the corner. It was covered with the rotting carcasses of animals and strange, faded talismans. At the very bottom sat several bowls of dark, brownish human blood. This was Ethan's curse altar. Seeing how deeply unsettling and evil the altar was, the men smashed it to pieces and set it on fire, burning it to ashes. As the altar disappeared, Ethan completely lost his mind. He started screaming wildly, chanting incomprehensible spells, looking completely deranged and out of touch with reality. Ivonne took a sum of money and sold him to an old bachelor in the village. The man was a rapist who didn't care about gender. For the rest of his life, Ethan was chained up like an animal in a dark cellar with a thick iron chain, treated like livestock. Every single curse he had ever uttered came back to him, doubled. I went home. The moment the altar was destroyed, my parents' minds suddenly cleared, and they returned to normal. When my parents saw my thin, pale face, tears streamed down their cheeks. My mother pulled me into her arms, crying with heartache. "My baby, it was our fault. We made you suffer so much." I hugged them tightly, the scars on their chests still visible to my mind's eye. I swore to myself that I would treat my parents well, and take good care of them for the rest of my life. Only the selfless, fearless, and sacrificial love of a parent, a love so pure they would give up a piece of themselves, could have given me a second chance at life and the power to avenge myself. As for those whose hearts are dark and twisted, controlled by jealousy, and who refuse to work for their own destiny, they will ultimately be consumed by the very evil they create. The end.